Welcome, everyone, to the PFF Fantasy Podcast, IDP edition. I'm John Macri, and this is it, the final week of the fantasy football regular season, just in time for 6 more teams to head out on a bye week as well. So it's going to be one hell of a week for fantasy managers looking at their final shot at getting into the playoffs, which makes lineup decisions all the more important. A lot of pressure to get it right this week. But as always, I'm going to do my best to give you guys all the tools and info to make the right choices so we can crush this week and move one step closer to fantasy glory. So let's get it. All right, like I said, it's the final week of the fantasy regular season. So as usual, I'll be going game by game, breaking down all of the key matchup data, player insight, and information to help you with your lineup decisions in a big week where we'll be without IDP options from the Ravens, Texans, Patriots, Broncos, Colts, and Commanders. Plenty of starting options in there. We also have plenty of injury situations to sort through and a look at, maybe more possible contingency options there. I'm recording this on Wednesday evening, so still not the most reliable practice report data just yet, but I'll try to hit on all those kind of questionable situations that affect our IDP relevant options here in week 14. And actually, then at the end, I'm going to include a quick look at the fantasy playoff schedules for probably just for linebackers and safeties in this episode to see who has the best projected tackle paths and the worst paths for that 3-week fantasy playoff stretch. So that's enough of that. Let's get right into week 14 now and start with Thursday night football. And the Green Bay Packers are facing the Detroit Lions. So this is already one of the first injury-related situations to keep an eye on. And I'm assuming by the time you're listening to this, you'll be able to look up whether Jaire Alexander is playing this week or not. And the reason that is important is because, as we talked about on the recap show this week, Alexander is kind of the key to this Packers secondary and how the other defensive backs are deployed. So starting with Keyshawn Nixon, who is kept almost exclusively to the outside when Alexander is out. So it takes away some of his slot usage, which kind of hurts his IDP potential, Nixon, that is. However, with Alexander in the lineup, Nixon does get a chance to move a little bit more inside. And when he's out of the lineup, it creates a little bit more opportunity for Javon Bullard to play in the slot, as well as help kind of backfill as a safety there, which hurts Evan Williams' snap share a little bit as well. But from what we've seen with Alexander in the lineup, Bullard doesn't play as much in the slot because Keyshawn Nixon is getting some of that work, and then Bullard actually ends up being the one to lose snaps for some reason, while Williams gets to play more safety. So it's kind of a weird situation. Basically, all these things hinge on Jaire Alexander. So to recap, if Alexander is in, Keyshawn Nixon's IDP stock improves, as does Javon Bullard. As does Evan Williams. Yeah, not Javon Bullard. With Alexander out, Nixon's stock decreases slightly, as does Bullard's, while Evan Williams may see more work and becomes maybe a more viable deep league option. The other injury situation to monitor, well, actually not to monitor, we got news right before we started recording that Edgerrin Cooper is out for this game because he missed last game with a hamstring injury. He's going to miss this one as well. So Isaiah McDuffie becomes an option for us again, maybe more in that deeper range, like LB3 type. It's not a true full-time role, but we're going to assume, that he's going to get a decent snap share, probably around 90% or so, maybe a little bit less. And then Quay Walker is a fine LB2 option this week. And then last bit for Green Bay, this isn't the best matchup for their pass rushers, specifically Rashawn Gary and Kingsley and Egbare, who are their starters. It does seem like at least Taylor Decker is going to be out, so maybe helps Egbare a little bit. But I have both of these guys really kind of like Gary edge 3 type, and Egbare. You can maybe put them in that range as well. They're really just deep league options at this point going against the Lions, who have a strong or offensive line with Penei Sewell, obviously, but also Jared Goff doing a really nice job avoiding sacks. As for the Detroit side of things, so as we know, Malcolm Rodriguez tore his ACL. So Zeke Turner stepped in last week as like a 90-ish% player. So I expect kind of a similar role for Turner this week, seeing as they don't quite seem ready to trust David Long as a starter. Turner is more of kind of like an LB3 still in that role. Jack Campbell, I have as like a top 12 option this week because there's just fewer options. But he's been really efficient, and he's not a bad option here against the Packers. So like Jack Campbell, Zeke Turner, a fine fill-in option off of waivers. Then Zadarius Smith is really kind of the only other like questionable type fringe lineup guy for the Lions, but he's got an even more difficult matchup going against the Green Bay Packers offensive line and Jordan Love. So we kind of talked about this offensive line a little bit last week with Miami and Chop Robinson, and they were not able to deliver a sack of Jordan Love. So it's going to be tough to trust Zadarius Smith this week, but I also understand that, deeper leagues might not have better options. So he's also in that kind of edge three range for me. Again, the Packers own the best pass blocking grade for their offensive line, and Jordan Love owns the second best pressure to sack conversion rate on the year for quarterbacks. Going to the New York Jets and Miami Dolphins next, and it seems like CJ Mosley is going to be back. It looks like he practiced today, so a good sign for him, but how does it affect Quincy Williams and Jamien Sherwood? I think, Quincy Williams obviously fine. I think Sherwood is fine as well. We've talked about it before, how I'm not overly concerned for Sherwood in that first game back for CJ Mosley, because we've seen the Jets ease, or at least it looked like they were easing him back into the lineup and just keeping him on for like the base 3 linebacker snaps. But honestly, it may just very well be the norm the rest of the season, where they roll with Sherwood and Quincy Williams as their every down starters. But first week back especially, I still feel fine about starting Sherwood. I have him. Where do I have him? LB 29 and Quincy Williams LB 25. So they are a little bit lower, but again, you might not have better options. These are 100% snap guys. There are still a few of them out there this week. They're among them, so they're definitely startable. And then on the defensive line for the New York Jets, Will McDonald, Quinnen Williams. It's a decent pass rush matchup for the Jets, mostly because Tua is allowing pressures to turn into sacks at a pretty high rate. The Miami offensive tackles, Teron Armstead and Kendall Lamb, have actually been pretty good. But we've talked about it before. Sacks they're a QB stat, and Tua is showing a tendency there lately. So I have Will McDonald as edge 16. Quinnen Williams, I have as DT7. It's definitely a better pass rush matchup for Quinnen Williams going against the Miami interior offensive line, specifically their guards. But Quinnen, again, in DT required leagues, 12 teams, you probably don't have a better option than him. So the other piece of that defensive line is kind of interesting. Hassan Reddick, I have his edge 29 this week. He actually led the Jets edge defenders in snaps last week with 67%. And that was coming out of the team's bye week, which could indicate that they're ready to kind of deploy him in a larger role the rest of the way after averaging only 42% of snaps prior to the bye week. So draws a decent-ish matchup here as a potential streamer, again, going against Tua Tagovailoa, who owns the 5th worst pressure to sack conversion rate in the league. And then as far as the Jets safeties go, it's going to be very hard to trust any Jets safety this week, even in a great matchup. Miami giving up the 2nd most tackles per game to the safety position. The issue is that none of the Jets safeties played full-time snaps last week, and they deployed a pretty heavy rotation among 5 players there. So it was Jalen Mills who played 70%, Chuck Clark played 67%, Tony Adams played 59%, Isaiah Oliver played 32%, and even Ashton Davis played 11%. So this is one where the matchup being so good, like it still isn't worth the risk, not in a week like this. So all of those guys should be on benches until we see a true full-time option there. All right, let's go to Miami. We talked about Chop Robinson last week and how I kind of expected his hot streak to end versus Green Bay. That sadly came true, but that doesn't mean he can't get back and start a new streak. He draws a good matchup here against Olu Fashanu at left tackle, who ranks 68th of 77 offensive tackles in pass blocking grade this season. So I got Chop as edge 24 this week. Aaron Rodgers is taking some sacks as well. He owns the 11th worst pressure to sack conversion rate there for Rodgers. So I like Chop to kind of get back on track here as like a low end edge 2 this week. And then the other thing is the Miami linebackers. So as we know, Anthony Walker missed last week's game due to a hamstring injury, which allowed Tyrel Dodson to play a full-time role. So if Walker is unable to go again this week, then Dodson's value definitely increases quite a bit. But if they're both active, then there's kind of this potential that Dodson and Walker could share snaps if Walker's active, right? Like partly because they might ease him in coming off a hamstring injury, and partly because, you know, maybe they want to see what they have in Tyrel Dodson here. We'll see what happens. But either way, the hamstring injury, we've seen it linger for more than 1 week. So there's a definite chance that Anthony Walker could miss this game and we don't have to worry about it. But just keep an eye on that if you are a Tyrel Dodson manager and looking to start him this week. It becomes a little bit trickier with Anthony Walker active. All right, moving to Atlanta and Minnesota next. And we'll start with the Falcons linebackers. Caden Ellis is really the only linebacker worth trusting right now in Atlanta. He's a top 12 option this week. We saw Troy Anderson return last week and immediately cut into Nate Landman's snaps, where both players played fewer than 40% of the defensive snaps last week. Not an ideal situation, especially this week. Like, if you have to play one, I'd probably lean toward Nate Landman just because he's the one that is playing on the early down. So he's getting a better situation for tackles against the run. But I mean, if you're playing less than 40% of snaps, like that's brutal. We can hopefully find better options. And we'll talk about a few of those waiver wire options and maybe deeper league options here as we go through. But Zeke Turner, obviously in Detroit, being one of them. We already talked about him, but there will be a few more here as we go. Last week, I referred to the Falcons defensive line as a group of NPCs, and they somehow got home for a season high 5 sacks in that game. Well, I apologize to absolutely no one, because they're still not really options in most leagues. They are very much non-playable characters here until we get some consistency from that group. So I continue to not trust the NPCs of the Falcons defensive line. Jesse Bates, Justin Simmons, not a great matchup versus Minnesota, but Jesse Bates still going to be a starter for most people here. Simmons, we could probably temper a little bit. Looking at Minnesota, Blake Cashman, I got more as a low-end LB2 this week in a poor matchup against the Falcons, who ranked 27th in tackles allowed to the linebacker position. He's really the only one worth starting, though. Like, Cameron Grugier-Hill is nearly impossible to trust in a matchup like this. And based on the usage, just 16% of snaps last week in place of Ivan Pace, who was on IR. So Cameron Grugier-Hill, not really one of those deep league options. We could hopefully find somebody better than that 16% snap share. I do feel much better about the safeties, though, in Minnesota. So Harrison Smith, I got as safety 8. Josh Metellus, I have as safety 12. So it is worth noting that Metellus, with Ivan Pace out, played more in the box last week at 52% than he has in any of the previous 3 weeks, where he was averaging just 33% in the box in those games where Ivan Pace was in the lineup along with Blake Cashman. So as a result, we got Josh Metellus' first double-digit tackle game of the season. Obviously, that really helps his chances, I think. I like his chances of kind of being back in that top 12 range again this week. So continue to like Josh Metellus in a good matchup. And then Cam Bynum, I have as safety 24 this week. I didn't mention the Minnesota edge rushers. It feels like we're starting them no matter what at this point. Andrew Van Ginkel and Jonathan Greenard. They both just been so good. So no need to go into too much detail there. All right, let's go to the New Orleans Saints and the New York Giants. So we'll start with let's start with Carl Granderson of the Saints. It's a good matchup for him this week. I have him as edge 17. He should see a lot of Evan Neal, who owns a 43.7 pass blocking grade. Not good. Granderson has been more matchup dependent this year, and this is at least a favorable matchup versus Drew Lock at quarterback as well. Drew Lock took 6 sacks last week. So yeah, Chase Young also a streaming option if you really need to, but like Granderson quite a bit here. We also highlighted Ugo Amadi last week being ranked ahead of Alontae Taylor. And the reason behind it essentially being that slot role belonging to Amadi and Taylor getting locked to the outside. So I have Amadi ahead again this week. I have him as CB4. And to be clear, like this might not be the case every week, depending on the matchup, because Ugo Amadi will come off the field versus those like non-11 personnel heavy offenses and could end up with like a 50 to 60% snap share, depending on the offense they're facing. But this week versus the New York Giants, who play about 71% of snaps in 11 personnel, that's a top 10 mark. And the Giants are also allowing the 3rd most tackles per game to cornerbacks. So Alontae Taylor remains a solid option again this week, as well as Ugo Amadi. Other than that, I got Demario Davis as LB31, Pete Werner as LB45. The New York Giants, we'll talk about them next. So no Dexter Lawrence. Unfortunately, he's done for the season. So we're down to Brian Burns and Kayvon Thibodeau on this defensive line. The Saints pass blocking unit is the worst in the league. The problem is Derek Carr is the best quarterback in the league at not letting pressures turn into sacks. Again, we've talked about it being more of a quarterback sacks that is. So he continues to be really good at avoiding getting sacked in games. So Brian Burns, like, he's still a starter. Again, options are thin this week. Kayvon Thibodeau is probably who I worry about a little bit more, but still, again, fewer options. So he's like a low-end edge too. He did have one of his best pass rush games of the season last week with a 90.3 pass rush grade. Even though he didn't get a sack, still looked really good, but he also did it against Tyler Guyton and Chuma Edoga in Dallas, who are both grading out as very poor pass blockers. But he'll get another chance against another poor offensive line here this week. So again, these guys are startable, but tempering expectations. Tyler Nubin. So I have him as safety 9 this week. We keep talking about him, but the usage in the box has been excellent. And he's starting to emerge as a more matchup proof option here. He now has 3 straight games of 12 tackles, which is crazy for a safety. The Saints aren't the best matchup, but it's hard not to start Nubin at this point. Like I said, proving to be more matchup proof thanks to that strong usage in the box. He played 49% of his snaps in the box last week. A few other notes on the Giants. The Saints are last in the NFL in 11 personnel rate. So Drew Phillips is a cornerback to avoid this week. If you've been streaming him or looking for the right matchups, because I know he's had some big weeks earlier in the year, but this is not the matchup for Drew Phillips. Bobby Okereke, it seems like he's going to be out this week, and apparently he might be out week to week. So I'm sure by the time you guys are listening to this, you'll get some better information or clearer information there. So if Bobby Okereke is out, Micah McFadden would likely move into a much larger role, playing a near every down role, while Darius Muasu would be kind of the deep league option. So keep an eye out to see if Muasu is available in your deep leagues. But McFadden is in deep leagues is probably already rostered, but he would earn a larger role and at least become startable against the Saints this week, who provide the 5th best matchup for tackles to the linebacker position. So definitely one to keep an eye on there. Okay, let's go to Carolina and Philadelphia next, and we'll start with Josey Jewell of the Carolina Panthers. I got him as LB8 this week. Really like Josey Jewell's matchup. The Eagles giving up the 3rd most tackles per game to the linebacker position. Trevin Wallace, so I have him more in the LB4 range. Like, he did play 79% of snaps last week, but we see snap shares fluctuate a fair bit for like these non-full-time linebackers, just depending on how often the opposing offense is like in passing situations, things like that. So uh, the other thing too with Wallace, like he hasn't been very effective outside of those first 2 games of the season. So he's really only an option because of the bye weeks and the matchup here. But you know, again, deeper leagues, we might not have better options. So Trevin Wallace, again, 79% snap share. If he's getting that in a good matchup, can still be a fine start. We just need him to be a little bit more efficient with his opportunities. Jadeveon Clowney and DJ Wonnum. I have his low end edge 3 types. They're going to be facing Jordan Mailata and Lane Johnson. I don't have confidence in them there. Like maybe they can do something, but I'm not starting either one of those guys if I can avoid it. A'Shawn Robinson's probably the favorite of that defensive line group for me. I have him as a top 10 defensive tackle this week. The Eagles are giving up the 3rd most tackles per game to defensive linemen. Robinson's actually a really strong tackler. He has a 10.2% tackle rate, which is more efficient than some linebackers. So like Frankie Louvu, Levante David, Mac Wilson, even Tremaine Edmonds is actually right on par with Tremaine Edmonds. Like these guys are full-time linebackers. That tackle efficiency should be closer to 13%. And A'Shawn Robinson is actually surpassing those guys at 10.2%. So really nice from him. It's allowed him to be a top 8 defensive tackle this season in IDP scoring, or at least in our IDP scoring. But yeah, maybe doesn't have like this elite pass rush upside, but really strong tackler and getting some decent snaps there. Looking at the Philadelphia defensive line, not an easy pass rush matchup on their side either. So Josh Sweat, I have his edge 25. Nolan Smith, I have his edge 37. This is a really solid pass blocking unit across the board for Carolina. And Bryce Young has actually been so much better at avoiding sacks. So he's been really good. And then Jalen Carter, he's still a starting defensive tackle for me in DT required leagues. He's playing a ton. We know he has elite pass rush upside just because of how well he's playing. Like he can be one of those guys that can start delivering multi-sack games here. It hasn't happened this season, but he's in year 2 of his NFL career and he's already posting some of the best pass rush metrics at the position. So sky's the limit here right now for Jalen Carter. He did get a sack last week. He's still due for more based on his level of play right now. So expect him to continue to be talked about here as we go through the rest of the weeks. But other than that, for Philadelphia, their linebackers, we're not sitting these guys. We said it last week with Zach Bond in particular, like coming off a down game in week 12 and then right back to being great again in week 3. So down weeks happen for all top IDP options. And the important thing is to just not overreact to them when they do and just trust the process. Guys like Zach Bond, Nakobe Dean, definitely going to be in our starting lineups. Reed Blankenship got hurt last game and did not return to the game. So if he can't go, Tristan McCullum was his replacement. It was not Sidney Brown. Sidney Brown was active for that game, but he only played on special teams. So it's also not a great matchup. So you're really only looking at Tristan McCullum if you're desperate. We just don't know what he is or what he can provide. And it's not a good matchup. Like I said, the Panthers are giving up the 20th most tackles per game to the safety position. Okay, let's go on to the Cleveland Browns and the Pittsburgh Steelers. And we'll start with Myles Garrett of the Cleveland Browns, because last time that these two teams faced each other, which was week 12, so literally just 2 weeks ago, Myles Garrett had 3 sacks versus Russell Wilson. And it could have been more if not for the snow on the ground, because I think all 3 of those sacks came in the first half. But yeah, the snow on the ground took away a lot of the pass rushers' footing in that game. I expect the weather to be a little bit better this week, so not overly concerned about that. Continuing to start Myles Garrett as an elite option. And then Jordan Hicks and Mohamed Diabate, definitely options as well here. Pittsburgh is giving up the most tackles per game to the linebacker position. So I got Jordan Hicks as LB10. I got Diabate in the LB3 range. He played about 74% of snaps last week. So not a full-time player, but a really good matchup here. So I like the potential. I also want to highlight Grant Delpit because we've talked about him a little bit, but the box usage has been great for him. He did have to leave last game for a bit due to injury, but he ended up coming back in, still ended up with 6 tackles. And he's had 7 or more tackles in each of his 4 games prior to last week. So those are great numbers for a safety. So I know I've had people who are kind of disappointed by his production, but it's only because we're comparing him to guys that are hitting on kind of some of the unstable big plays, which this was the whole thing with Budda Baker this offseason, right? And why I liked him so much, because people were done with him because he didn't have the big plays, but realizing that these strong tackle numbers and usage especially are a much better indicator, and knowing that the big plays will happen just as a result of being on the field is kind of what makes these guys great options. So don't get impatient with Grant Delpit. Trust the usage, trust the tackle numbers, be happy with those tackle numbers as well. And anything else is really just kind of a bonus that, we can't really count on each week. So he's on the fringe of a safety 1 range for me again this week. Okay, the Steelers. Alex Highsmith has a chance to return this week from the ankle injury. He's missed the past 3 games because of the injury, and it was apparently considered to be a 2 to 3 week absence for him. So Nick Herbig, obviously, he's been excellent in Alex Highsmith's absence this season, though we do expect his snaps to likely decrease pretty significantly once Highsmith is back in the lineup. This is a prime matchup for the Pittsburgh Steelers pass rush as well. They're going against the 28th ranked pass blocking unit of the Cleveland Browns and Jameis Winston, who owns a 21.1% pressure to sack conversion rate. That's 24th, so it's not terrible. He's actually been a little bit better recently, and that's really brought that number back down for him, and much better than Deshaun Watson as well. So, but really, the Steelers pass rush is different between TJ Watt, Cam Hayward, and then whoever's starting, whether it's Alex Highsmith or Nick Herbig. So going to be a much tougher test. Obviously, these guys, I think they only got the 1 sack against him last time they played. Again, that was the snow game, and that was the Browns running the ball a lot more than they ever do. So yeah, we like the potential here a little bit more this week. Deshaun Elliott is playing a bit more as of late. So this is the Steelers safety. He's still coming off on like some obvious passing situations. So I'm still struggling to like fully trust him because of that. The Browns also, like I just said, they pass more than any team in the league. And so really Deshaun Elliott, I got him as safety 18. I'm just slowly kind of creeping him up there. The usage is like great in the box. And he's got a couple of games now where he's played 90+% of snaps. So starting to feel a little bit better about him. But again, them taking him off in passing situations does worry me a little bit against the Browns, who are a pass-heavy offense. Also worth noting that Cameron Sutton has replaced Beanie Bishop as the team's nickel. If you're looking for a streamer at cornerback, the Browns do play a high rate of 11 personnel. They're giving up the 7th most tackles per game to opposing cornerbacks as well. I didn't touch on Patrick Queen. He's a fine starter this week, so not to go into too much detail there. Peyton Wilson not playing enough to trust. I know he had the fumble 6. Was it a fumble 6 or pick 6 last week? He scored a touchdown, but again, we're not really trusting that as much either, just because the snap shares is much lower. So let's go to the Las Vegas Raiders and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and we'll start with. Let's start with the Raiders because Max Crosby's there, and Max Crosby has now played 6 straight games of 100% of snaps. He got out of the sack drought last week as well. He's going up against Baker Mayfield, who owns the 6th worst pressure to sack conversion rate in the league at 25%. So continue to like Max Crosby, but just wanted to highlight that he hasn't missed a snap in 6 games, which is unreal for a defensive lineman. Probably more noteworthy here is Trayvon Merrick. So I have him as safety 14 right now, but he has regressed quite a bit in recent weeks, which some of it is due to just, kind of his previous numbers being propped up by a couple interceptions. I think he had like a sack in there as well, but his tackle numbers were much better since being moved to more of like this box heavy safety. And that role hasn't really changed that much, though there have been some weeks where the usage has been different, I guess. Including in week 12, he spent 22 snaps, so 32% of his snaps on the defensive line. That resulted in a 3 tackle game. That usage did get scaled back a bit last week. He was only 13% on the defensive line, and he played in the box for 48% of snaps, but still just a 3-tackle game again. He's also been rushing the passer more. He rushed the passer more in his last 2 games with 13 and 6 attempts, respectively, more than he has in any other game this year, which kind of hurts his tackle efficiency as well. So that combination of D-line, pass rush, we've talked about it before with some of the off-ball linebackers and how it hurts their tackle efficiency. Same thing applies with some of these safeties as well. So Merrick's still a viable option because the usage in the box, but at least some concern here with these recent inefficiencies and slight change in role kind of move him outside the top 12 right now, just because he might be a little bit more boom bust at the moment. Other than that, for the Raiders, let's see. I got Robert Spillane as LB 16, Divine Diablo as LB 40, Tampa Bay 21st in tackles per game to the linebacker position. Nate Hobbs may be back this week. He's a viable CB streamer if he's back. He missed the last 3 games due to injury. Tampa Bay does play a high rate of 11 personnel, about 75%, which I think is 6th in the league. And they're also top 5 in tackles allowed per game to cornerbacks as well. Okay, let's go to Tampa Bay. And we'll start with KJ Britt, who exited week 13 with an ankle injury and did not return. He was actually replaced by JJ Russell in a near full-time role. JJ Russell played 88% of snaps the rest of the way with KJ Britt out of the lineup. So if Britt is unable to go again this week, Russell might make for a solid replacement option for those in need. He's kind of one of those deep league waiver wire options that we can kind of take a look at, just monitor the practice reports, see where KJ Britt is, if he's a limited participant, if he's a non-participant. We can start to feel a little bit better about JJ Russell. So definitely an option there for those deeper leagues. Other than that, the Tampa Bay safeties, Christian Izien, I think should be in a good spot to kind of stream this week. Tyke Smith and Mike Edwards, the safety, are questionable again. So Izien previously was filling in for Tyke Smith in the slot, at least in week 12. But then in week 13, he not only had to cover some slot duties, but safety as well, because Jordan Whitehead's already on IR. And then Mike Edwards suffered an injury last week and did not return to the game. So Izien has kind of been like this versatile defensive back for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers this year. And that versatility should keep him on the field, assuming one of those two, Tyke Smith or Mike Edwards, miss another game this week. And then, yeah, as for Tyke Smith, I mean, he's been dealing with a knee injury that's kept him out for 3 straight. If he's active, he's a strong start, but I think Christian Izien becomes a little bit more interesting here if Smith misses again. Okay, Jacksonville and Tennessee are up next, and I'll start with the Jacksonville pass rush going against the Tennessee Titans, because always love the pass rush matchup versus Tennessee, and with Will Levis at quarterback. The Titans are a bottom 5 pass blocking unit. Will Levis owns the 2nd worst pressure to sack conversion rate in the league at 31%. So Josh Hines-Allen, Trayvon Walker, I got both of those guys as top 12 options this week. They should hopefully feast against this Tennessee offensive line and Will Levis. Foye Oluokun, still getting the defensive line usage. He's still rushing the passer a bit. He's still coming off the field for snaps here and there. So as long as that is the case, he's always going to kind of be in that LB2 range with plenty of others ranked ahead of him. Even in a week like this, he's still in that LB2 range for me. Devin Lloyd in more of the LB3 range. Let's talk about Tennessee here for a second. And Daryl Worley is interesting because he led all defensive players last week with 17 total tackles. And that's because he ended up being the one to keep the starting safety job over Mike Brown when Amani Hooker rejoined the lineup last week. So previously, when Amani Hooker was out, it was Mike Brown and Daryl Worley as the starters. And then even before Daryl Worley emerged, Mike Brown was the starter. So Worley has now passed Mike Brown. It's not a great matchup this week against Jacksonville. They're 27th in tackles allowed to the safety position. So just kind of beware of chasing the Daryl Worley production. I'll tell you where I have him actually, because I can't remember exactly where I put him in the rankings. So he's more of a safety 3 for me this week. I have him as safety 34. He can be a fine fill-in for deeper leagues off waivers, but not necessarily projecting him for even double-digit tackles again this week at least. So fine to pick him up, but I think we'll wait for better matchups to potentially start him again. And then the Tennessee linebackers, Kenneth Murray, I got his LB 26, Jerome Baker, LB 32, Jeffrey Simmons, I got his DT 2, Harold Landry, edge 21, decent matchup. Mac Jones is going to be at quarterback. I think that's whose pressure to sack conversion rate I have on the screen there, because I'm assuming Trevor Lawrence was out at that point when I made that slide. And then Arden Key, more of an edge 4. He's been pretty good, pretty productive, but again, he's not like the best pass rusher. It's hard. It's always hard to trust these guys. They can very easily put up zeros just as much as they could anything else. So yeah, that's the Tennessee Titans. Before I move on to the later slate games, I do want to let you guys know that this episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just a job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. So you can hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. Go ahead and post your job for free at linkedin.com/PFFfantasy. That's linkedin.com/PFFfantasy to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, let's go to Seattle and Arizona next. Let's start with Leonard Williams. Leonard Williams he's been on a tear in recent weeks. He delivered 5 sacks and a 92-yard pick 6 over his last 2 games. That's going to make him near impossible to sit for IDP managers this week. I will say, like, it's not the best matchup against Arizona. They're one of the better interior offensive lines. They've been pretty solid there. They earned the 7th best pass blocking grade as a unit, that interior offensive line. They've allowed just 4 sacks all year. That's also 7th best. And Kyler Murray, too, owns one of the better pressure to sack conversion rates in the league at 16.5%. So, look, nobody's benching Leonard Williams after what he did the past 2 weeks, but just, again, keeping in mind, it's not the best matchup. Don't be surprised if those numbers come down a bit. And then the Seattle safeties this past week pretty much confirmed that Rayshon Jenkins was not being eased back into the lineup coming off injury, as he played an even lower snap share than his first week back. He played 40% last week. So Kobe Bryant remains the starter there next to Julian Love in a good matchup for safeties. And Jenkins, I think, should be out of our lineup. So Julian Love, Kobe Bryant, those guys are both solid options. I mean, Kobe Bryant more for the safety 3 deeper type leagues, but the Cardinals are giving up the 6th most tackles per game to the safety position. And then Ernest Jones, I have his LB4 this week. This is the 2nd best matchup for linebacker tackles. Tyrese Knight, more in the LB3 range. He played about 78% last week, so a deeper league option there as well. On the Arizona side, Seattle is actually giving up the fewest tackles per game to opposing linebackers. We saw that last week with the Jets linebackers. Quincy Williams, I think only got 6 total tackles. He added a sack in there and a forced fumble, but the reason that I like looking at tackles allowed versus points allowed is because we can eliminate a lot of these kind of unstable anomalies like sacks and interceptions, pick sixes, right? So Jamien Sherwood had just 4 tackles in that one as well, by the way. So low output, the Seahawks, that's just what they're allowing this year. It's not great for the linebackers. So Kaiser White, I have his LB 24 on the very low end of LB 2. And then Mac Wilson, I have his LB 48. We've talked about Mac Wilson quite a bit, right? Like, can he have those 2 sack games every once in a while? Yes, of course, because of that usage on the defensive line and as a pass rusher. But is it worth risking the incredibly low floor for a linebacker who rushes a bunch, plays on the D line even more, and isn't a full-time player? No, not at a position where, we want that safe linebacker tackle floor. So again, we've talked about him many times. Nothing changes there coming off a big week. We trust the process over results. We will be A-okay here the rest of the way if we continue to avoid Mac Wilson where possible. Arizona's defensive line, more non-playable characters there. Budda Baker, I got a safety 2. Jalen Thompson returned last week, played his usual full-time role, played 48% in the box. I got him as safety 15 this week. But yeah, that's Arizona. Let's talk about the Buffalo Bills and the Los Angeles Rams next. So we'll start with Matt Milano of the Buffalo Bills because we saw his return last week. We touched on it on the recap show, but we talked about it on the preview show last week as well. We talked about how it was essentially, if Milano was back, it was a death blow to Dorian Williams. And that was in fact the case this past week, right? Williams did not play at all. Milano fully absorbed that LB2 role. He came off on obvious passing down. So I got him as more like a low end LB3 this week. Because the Rams are, they will pass the ball. They're also not giving up a ton of tackles to the linebacker position. So Milano, not in a full-time role. He's more LB3. Terrell Bernard, I got his LB20 this week. Again, it's more just matchup based. If it was a better matchup, Terrell Bernard would be higher, but we'll trust those numbers for here. Other than that, Greg Rousseau, I got his edge 12. Really like the pass rush opportunity here, beating that offensive line. It's just a matter of getting Matthew Stafford to the ground, which isn't always easy. He's decent at avoiding sacks. And then Teron Johnson, I have his CB3 this week. The Rams are giving up the 4th most tackles per game to cornerbacks. We should see Teron Johnson get a lot of work in the slot. The Rams are one of the more 11 personnel heavy offenses in the league. So Teron Johnson had a relatively quiet game last week against the 49ers. I'm expecting a nice bounce back for him this week. And then on the Rams side of things, not an easy pass rush matchup for Jared Verse and Byron Young. So Jared Verse gets Dion Dawkins, where he's also got to deal with Josh Allen at quarterback, who is among the best quarterbacks in the league at avoiding sacks when pressured, right? So edge 13 for Verse. He's been really, really good. It's just he's outside the top 12 for me this week because of the matchup. And then Byron, I have edge 22, so low end edge 2. Kobe Turner, I got as DT 10 and Braden Fisk as DT 14. There's just not as many defensive tackles here, especially now losing Dexter Lawrence as well. So it moves some of these other guys up, but again, the matchups aren't great. And then the Rams linebackers, Christian Roseboom, I got his LB 30. Omar Spates, I got his LB 44. Like, these guys, they might not be the best linebackers in the league, but they can have their moments for IDP. Roseboom has at least been very efficient. He's at like a near 18% tackle rate. Actually, this might be like our new this might be our new Singleton 2.0, to be honest. Like, he has the long hair, he isn't playing full time, he's got this elite tackle rate. I mean, now that Dorian Williams is done, maybe we could, hand the moniker of Princeton off to Christian Roseboom here instead. I think it maybe fits him a little bit better. But yeah, he played 90% of snaps last week. That's not bad. If he's going to play in that range, that makes him more trustworthy. The only thing is, we've seen this change so often this season, right? Like Omar Spates played 63%. So we're not trusting Omar Spates over Christian Roseboom. And again, I just barely trust that 90% snap share will be the norm because it's changed so often this season. But for now at least, the new Princeton is an option here with 6 teams on a bye. At safety, Cam Curl is this guy's he's a pain in my ass. The box usage, it was a 1 week thing. It went back to normal last week, back to being kind of, mid. That's just what he's been this season. I got him as like safety 26. Quentin Lake, much better, safety 10. But yeah, Cam Curl's killing me this year. I don't know what to tell you. You just can't trust him for the most part. When you do bench him, he'll deliver like a fumble 6 or pick 6, whatever it was that 1 week. This guy is becoming the bane of my existence here. But yeah, Cam Curl, it's just an average matchup here for safeties, but the usage is not really all that encouraging either. So if he's not going to be very effective with his snaps, then he's outside the top 24 safeties almost every week. Okay, let's go to Chicago and San Francisco next, and we'll start with let's start with Gervon or Gervon Dexter. Still don't know. No matter how much Jake Colhagen tried to coach me on how to say it there, that was very unhelpful, Jake. But yeah, Gervon. Let's call him Gervon for now. We mentioned him briefly on last week's show how he was kind of a sneaky good DT option for IDP. Got 7 tackles. That included a sack and a fumble recovery last week. Playing a decent amount of snaps. He's another guy that's not like an elite pass rush threat, but in a similar vein to A'Shawn Robinson, he's someone who can fall into tackles and get the job done there. So Dexter is a fine option. Montez Sweat is probably the only other defensive lineman option really for IDP. Even if Trent Williams is back, he's actually likely to avoid Trent Williams at left tackle. He lines up more on the other side, so he'll probably face Colton McKivitz, who's a little bit more average as a pass blocker. So Montez Sweat, I have his edge 23 this week. We trust their linebackers. The safeties, I'm monitoring, again, Elijah Hicks. Again, Jonathan Owens has been like a solid fill-in option since Hicks has been out. So if Hicks is out again, we could plug in Jonathan Owens. Otherwise, I think Elijah Hicks probably goes back into a starting role. And then Kevin Byard. I mean, I got him as safety 1 this week. This is the best matchup for safety tackles, and Kevin Byard has been excellent all season. So hard not to keep him in your lineup. On the 49ers side, maybe the most interesting thing is Fred Warner. So Fred Warner has been dealing with a fractured ankle and playing through it, but he did struggle to play every snap as recently as last week, which does cause some concern. But then also his level of play since the injury may be affecting him, right? Like through the first 4 weeks of the season when he was healthy, he was earning an elite 95.9 overall grade. That was number 1 among linebackers. He had a 94.9 coverage grade, also first among linebackers, 88.8 run defensive grade. That was 3rd. And he had a 15% tackle rate. That was 18th, but 15% is a really, really strong number. But since that point, when he sustained the injury, now he ranks 54th in overall grade with a 62.3. He ranks 21st in coverage grade with a 65.5. He ranks 66th in run defense grade with a 60.5. And now he ranks 43rd in tackle rate with a 12.5%. Again, the average tackle rate for off-ball linebackers is 13.3%. So he's a little bit below that. Little bit concerning here for Fred Warner. You wonder if they get to the point where maybe they shut him down for the year, as they kind of they've been struggling as a team to be in the playoff hunt here. If they lose another game, you do wonder if that'll happen. So Devondre Campbell also didn't play a full complement of snaps last week. So with both of these guys really not playing full time, and then you combine the decline in play of Fred Warner, I think they both carry some risk this week in a matchup against the Chicago Bears, who rank just 24th in tackles per game to linebackers. So Fred Warner, I have his LB 17, but there might be other guys in that range, even though a couple that might be ranked lower than him, that I would trust a little bit more. D Winters also becomes kind of a very deep league option, as he's been getting decent snaps in like base packages, and then he was even replacing Devondre Campbell at times on certain drives. So again, it would be a desperation play if you're thinking about D Winters, especially in a poor matchup. But again, you may be in a very deep league where there aren't many options. He would definitely be somebody that should still be available on the waiver wire, even in the deepest of leagues. So just a name to keep in mind. Nick Bosa, big question mark again this week. He did not practice today, which is Wednesday. So not sure if he's going to be able to go. Like, if he's active, we play him. Caleb Williams owns the third worst pressure to sack conversion rate in the league. Leonard Floyd could be a potential streamer this week as well. I got him as edge 33. Again, Caleb Williams taking some sacks there. And then the only other piece of it, this 49ers defense, was Talanoa Hufanga should be back at practice with the potential to return this week. It doesn't mean that he's guaranteed to come back. He was on IR. The practice window's open. They're expecting him to practice. Not sure if they're expecting him to play. If he does play, if he's active, Malik Mustafa should be out of IDP lineups if Hufanga is active. So keep an eye on that one, because we do not want to get stuck with a 0 of Malik Mustafa if Talanoa Hufanga is active. Okay, let's go. Sunday night football is up next. Los Angeles Chargers, Kansas City Chiefs. Let's start with the Chargers defensive line. So Joey Bosa led the Chargers edge rushers in snap share last week, amazingly, at 73%. Khalil Mack played 70%. So both of those guys appear fully healthy for now. The downside is Tuli Tuipulotu, who only played 39.5% of snaps. That is a bummer for him. This is the usual pecking order of this defensive line. So barring injury, which, if we're being honest, is very possible, Tuli Tuipulotu should be on benches again. He's just not playing enough. It's not that he can't get a sack on that snap share, but is much more likely to not get a sack, right? Especially against the Chiefs. Patrick Mahomes, very elusive back there. He is taking more sacks over the past couple of weeks, but it's still not an ideal matchup. The O-line is very good as well. So I have Joey Bosa as edge 26. I know, like, he's a very good pass rusher. The snap share is back, but we know the history there. It's very hard to trust him. And then Khalil Mack, I have his edge 15. Again, more matchup based that he's not in the top 12, but a solid play either way. Chargers linebackers, I got Diane Henley at LB2. The deeper league option is Troy Dye. Delivered a pretty strong IDP performance in week 13. He led the team in tackles on just 76.5% of snaps. The Chargers have been pretty inconsistent with their linebacker usage outside of Diane Henley. So trusting Dye, it carries some risk, but in deeper leagues, he might be one of the better options available off the waiver wire. Because the only other thing to keep in mind, though, is Denzel Perryman could be back. We don't know. Not that I expect Denzel Perryman to take too many of his snaps. He just hasn't really factored in that much. He's really kind of been kept as the LB3, regardless of who's active. But the other piece is Junior Colson as well, right? I believe they're expecting him to come off IR soon. So keep an eye out there if you are going to be picking up Troy Dye. I know I got a lot of Troy Dye questions this week, so he's somebody that people are going to have on their rosters. But whether you can start him or not probably has to do with who is available for the Chargers. If Perriman and Colson are both back, there's no chance that I'd be trusting Troy Dye. And then safeties, I got Derwin as safety 5. I got Elijah Molden as a potential start as well. He became a full-time option last week because Alohi Gilman is now on IR. And then Tony Jefferson filled in for, well, I guess technically Tony Jefferson filled in for Molden. Molden filled in for Gilman. So Jefferson didn't play the full-time role. He had a nice game. He had a pretty productive game, but he played 67% of snaps. So hard to trust that. Same thing with Marcus May, 26% of snaps. He got an interception in there. So just, if you're looking at the box score, you think you could trust these guys this week. I would not. I'm not chasing the Tony Jefferson or Marcus May production this week. It's just Derwin James and Elijah Molden for me. Okay, Kansas City is up next. Chris Jones finally got his first sack since week 4, and then he added a second one just to make up for lost time. It feels like we've been talking about that sack drought forever, and banking on the multi-sack upside, but there it is. The nice thing is he's playing more than he ever has in his career. He's averaging 83% of snaps this season. That's the highest snap average for him in his 9-year career. So Chris Jones, I have his DT3 this week. I continue to like him. Nick Bolton, it feels like we're always talking about him. He had a really nice game last week. The matchup this week, slightly above average. So things are looking a little bit more favorable for Bolton down the stretch in terms of tackle matchups. Hopefully that holds and allows him to kind of produce like he did last week with 10 solos and, can make up for his low production all year when it matters most here, right? So this week, LB 18, but a hopeful at least for Nick Bolton. And then the safeties, the Brian Cook box usage, it went away. It appeared to just be a one-time thing. Justin Reed remains the better option. It's a poor matchup against the Chargers. They rank 31st in tackles allowed to the safety position. So Justin Reed, safety 23, and Brian Cook, safety 35. Okay, let's talk about the Cincinnati Bengals next. The Bengals and the Dallas Cowboys. This is our Monday night football game. And starting with those Bengals, they have finally given someone else snaps over Sam Hubbard. Joseph Ossai got the second most snaps next to Trey Hendrickson this past week. He even got the sack. So this is a good matchup for the Bengals edges going against Tyler Guyton on the left side and Terrence Steele, who have been awful pass blockers. So we're going to continue starting Trey Hendrickson. I have him as the top 5 edge this week, but Joseph Ossai could be a fine streamer as well if you need him. There are injury concerns here. So Logan Wilson missed last week's game due to a knee injury. If he misses again this week, which definitely feels like a possibility at this point, the Bengals season is pretty much over. If this knee injury is anything more than minor, there's a good chance that they shut him down, which makes Akeem Davis-Gaither pretty interesting. He would see a pretty significant bump up the ranks as a near full-time player alongside Jermaine Pratt, obviously. But it is a little trickier, right? The Bengals play on Monday night, so it's harder to manage. But for fantasy managers of like Logan Wilson, for example, Davis-Gaither should be on your roster if you plan on relying on Wilson without any kind of clear news on his availability heading into Sunday. Otherwise, I think, if you're somebody else just looking for a potential lottery ticket, Akeem Davis-Gaither, I would be adding him and stashing him and seeing what happens with Logan Wilson and his knee. But he could definitely be another one of those guys that could have some value here down the stretch. And then the other piece was Jordan Battle. He finally surpassed Vonn Bell on the depth chart this past week, coming out of the team's bye. We've been tracking that for a long time. We were the first ones on that, making sure that, or at least monitoring the rotation there between Jordan Battle and Vonn Bell, and expecting Jordan Battle to, surpass him at some point, and even highlighted that it could be coming out of the bye. That does seem to be the case. There's still some risk that the Bengals will rotate Bell in on some snaps, but Battle is as close to a full-time role as he's been all year, and he's getting prime deployment in the box as well. So it's not a great matchup. The Cowboys rank 25th in tackles allowed per game to safeties, but for deeper leagues, Battle has at least seemingly emerged as a viable option for those in need right now. I think I have him as safety 27. So safety 27. And then the other piece of the Bengals is Cam Taylor-Britt got back to a full-time role in week 13 after he was seemingly benched for DJ Turner, aka Juan Drago Turner, in week 11. However, Juan Drago now on IR with a broken clavicle. That allowed Taylor-Britt to be a more comfortable IDP starter. He was actually able to deliver, I think it was a pick 6 last week to go along with 7 total tackles. So provides a little bit more confidence that he'll remain a starting option this week going against the Dallas Cowboys, who have allowed more tackles per game to cornerbacks over their last 3 games than any other team at 18. So could be a nice matchup here for Cam Taylor-Britt as a streamer. All right, last team of the week, the Dallas Cowboys. Micah Parsons got him as edge 3. He's going to be facing Armarius Mims, who is more like Armarius Mids. No, I'm sorry, Bengals fans. you don't deserve that. You've had a hard season. I don't need to be calling Armarius Mims names. Armarius Mims, what I really want to say is he's just been average. But Micah Parsons has 3 2-sack games now in his last 4 since returning from injury. Like, we talk about the ability to produce multi-sack games multiple times per season and why we should be more accepting of kind of the low floor games when they happen for these high end edge types. And Parsons is really kind of showing that right now. So continuing to lock him into lineups. Eric Kendricks, I got his LB 14, DeMarvion Overshown as LB 11. Yeah, that pick 6 was nasty from Overshown last week. Obviously, we can't count on that every week, but he's solid, playing every snap. 6 teams on a bye. He now moves into that LB1 range. Donovan Wilson, he was rotating with Wanye Thomas last week. We talked about this early in last week's episode because they played on Thursday, that Donovan Wilson was not startable because he was rotating, but he went back to being a near full-time player and naturally had one of his better IDP performances when anybody who was paying attention to the usage from last week was basically avoiding him in starting lineups, right? And the only reason that he went back to full-time was because Wanye Thomas got injured early on in the game. He played like 2 snaps or something like that. So they had no choice but to go back to Donovan Wilson, which means maybe we can as well. Thomas's injury should keep him out for a few weeks. So Wilson could go back to being that kind of borderline weekly safety 2, safety 3 for IDP. And then lastly, the other player that we thought we could use as a fun streamer last week also got injured, and that was cornerback Josh Butler. He had been filling in for Trayvon Diggs. He obviously had that ultra effective game in week 12, but didn't get a chance after getting hurt in the first half of last week's game. I'd imagine Trayvon Diggs will be back this week anyways. Okay, usually this is where we wrap up, but I wanted to add a little bonus for you guys, since if you're listening to this at this point in the season, I assume that you're likely in playoff contention, and I wanted to highlight some of the maybe better tackle matchup schedules for the fantasy playoffs, for linebacker and safety at least. I'll have all the other positions on Twitter as well, and I'll link that in the episode description because I know this isn't going to be super easy to read or follow on screen. Actually, I haven't tweeted it out yet, so I will tweet it out probably on some point Thursday or Friday, and then I'll link it in here. But essentially what I did was use our usual matchup tackle chart, and I put all the team's opponents together for each position, weeks 15 to 17, and use the expected average tackles per game number across those 3 games for each position to see who could be in the best spot to produce during that final stretch. Obviously, these numbers are subject to change after every game, and I will update them every week. But as of now, let's take a peek at our linebackers. So maybe I'll just highlight maybe the top 5 and bottom 5 just for this, and then again I'll link the thing in there when I tweet it out. But our best matchups for linebackers in the fantasy playoffs, we got the Philadelphia Eagles at number 1. So Zach Bond, Nakobe Dean should stay hot. The Steelers are at number 2. So good news for those who invested heavily in Patrick Queen in drafts this offseason. The Panthers are at number 3. So Josie Jewell might be able to kind of continue his sleeper value. Kansas City is at number 4. So Nick Bolton, who has dealt with a shit schedule all year, should be in for better games in the fantasy playoffs. And then New England is tied with Kansas City at 4, which is a bummer since their linebackers aren't very trustworthy. And then the worst matchups for the fantasy playoffs for linebackers include the Minnesota Vikings at number 32. So not ideal for Blake Cashman. The Titans are at 31. Kenneth Murray, Jerome Baker, they're already kind of mid, Baker especially. The Giants at number 30. So Bobby Okereke, depending on how serious this injury is, like he's been more matchup dependent, but could struggle if he's back, especially in week 16 and 17. Denver at number 29. So Cody Barton and Justin Sternad not in a great spot. And Indianapolis at 28. So this is probably the most worrisome since Zaire Franklin and EJ Speed have been so good this year. But I don't know if anyone in that bottom 5 can overcome the matchups it's probably those two. So the full chart is up here, but again, I'll link the Twitter post whenever I do end up posting it, probably near the end of this week, Thursday or Friday. Like I said, I'll post it in the episode description. And then let's look at safety really quick as well, since we have a little bit of time. So the best matchups for safeties, Cleveland is number one. So Grant Delpit, we talked about him, continue to remain patient there. The Miami Dolphins are at number two, so not bad for Jordan Poyer, Javon Holland. San Francisco is at number three. So if Talanoa Hufanga comes back, he could be really good. So someone to kind of consider off waivers if available, to utilize in the fantasy playoffs if you need him. Baltimore is at number four, so maybe some hope for Kyle Hamilton after his move to more of a deep safety role. And then the Chargers at number five. So, I mean, Derwin season in the playoffs would make yours truly very, very happy. The worst matchups for safeties, number 32 is Jacksonville. So this is a nice one for us since we can't trust their safeties anyways. Number 31 is Tampa Bay. So this is Antoine Winfield in a concerning spot. Seattle is number 30. Julian Love, he's been great all year, so maybe he can overcome, but at least some concern there. Green Bay is at number 29. So actually, this is another group we've had a hard time trusting anyways, so could potentially keep avoiding them. And then the Jets are at 28. So this is also a group that we're avoiding. So the worst matchups for safeties mostly works out for us IDPers here. Again, I'll have the other positions posted too. I didn't want to put them all for the show since we still have one more week of data really to collect before the playoffs, and they aren't the most visually friendly, or maybe even not audio friendly things to go over. So just a quick little bonus segment for those who care. If you do want me to update that at the end of every episode, let me know. But I understand that it's not necessarily the most visually or audio appealing here as I'm going through it. Either way, I'll link the thing in the episode description so you could find it. And if you want to look at all the charts and care about that kind of stuff. But for now, that is a wrap on this week. Again, thank you all for tuning in, liking, subscribing, leaving kind reviews and comments. I appreciate you all. And I really hope you not only get into the fantasy playoffs, but dominate as well. And if I can help with that in any tiny way possible, I'm happy to do it. So feel free to ask questions in the comments if you'd like. I'll also have the IDP Fantasy Report, which is out now and linked in the episode description. That'll have all your waiver wire targets, snap shares, utilization nuggets, plenty of my thoughts and notes for every team. IDP rankings article will also be linked in the episode description, as well as the IDP rankings page where the updates to the rankings will be held as like injuries and stuff like that kind of come out closer to game time. And then I will be back on Monday morning with a week 14 IDP recap. So be sure to check that out. Go kick your opponent's ass this week. Secure yourself a nice, comfortable playoff spot. Good luck. And until next time, peace out.